Hello, everyone. It is so great to be here presenting at You Got This. I'm such a fan of all these events, and thank you, Kevin, for inviting me to talk. Today, I want to talk a bit about taking different paths. And oftentimes in life, there can be multiple paths that one can approach, and some of those paths are more trodden than other paths. And I think that the path that I've taken a bit in my professional life might be seen as a bit less traveled. So I started my professional career as a rabbi, a congregational leader, both in synagogues and on university campuses. And I did that for about a decade throughout the United States. And about 5 years ago, I decided to pivot my career and I became a software developer. I went to a boot camp, did the whole boot camp process, and found my first job. And then since then, I've had a couple roles in different software companies. And I say that my path feels a bit unconventional, but I actually think if we take a moment to really think about the trends today, the path that I went on from one career to another career, it happened to be from rabbi to developer, but it could be anything, is becoming increasingly more conventional. More and more people, especially as second careers, a bit older in life, are deciding to change jobs. And they're doing that for a variety of reasons. And it's happening a lot. And in fact, the pandemic itself, this past period of time, has in many ways accelerated this process. Last month, Harvard Business Review put out a study that showed that somewhere between 20% increase in this from 2020 to now, people in the ages of 30 to 45 resigning from their careers. And not only that, those people in that age bracket, which captures my age bracket, have the greatest rate of resignation of any age bracket, people who are switching careers. It's a huge sector. People are doing it because maybe they're looking for something new. I switched into software because it provided me with curiosity, a chance to build something, to exercise a part of my brain I wasn't really exercising before. And a lot of people are in that process. As of last month as well, Business Insider said that somewhere like 66% of Americans, and this is Americans, but one can extrapolate probably to others as well, are keen to switch their jobs. And as I said, they're doing it because they are interested in new opportunities, because they're curious, because they want to try something exciting and new. And there's also another really fundamental reason, which is, according to the latest data that we have, software developers earn on average 3 times more annual salary than anyone else. So at the most basic fundamental level, becoming a software developer in today's economic landscape is a great way to earn a living for yourself, if to support your family, if to support your loved ones, to lift yourself up out of difficult financial situations. It offers economic security in a time of a lot of economic insecurity. So there's a lot of appeal, a lot of attractiveness to switching into this field and becoming an early developer, even when you're a bit older and had another professional life. And yet, doing so is very different than perhaps the experience might feel like. When I was going through the process initially and searching for my first job, it felt very much like I was that square peg or that triangle peg, I guess, trying to fit into that circle hole and looking all around me and seeing everyone else, at least that's how I perceived it, gliding through their paths. Maybe they went to uni and they had a CS degree, and then they just went right over to their first job, their first internship, or whatever. They were coding from the time they were 2 years old when they were in diapers, and now they were a senior staff developer at the age of 12. And it just felt like everyone else was having it so easy. And those of us from non-traditional backgrounds just kept on trying to fit ourselves in despite all the challenges. Now, I firmly believe that this quote from Dr. Seuss is utterly correct, that when something is awful, something is wrong, when there's deep issues, it's incumbent upon us to help make it better, not only for ourselves, but for everyone else who's also coming up through this process as well. That if we can improve both the condition for us as individuals, for any of us who are early career developers trying to make it, and by doing so, we also, at the same time, improve the condition for those who are going to come right behind us. And in this field, that could just be tomorrow. It could be an hour from now. There are new developers coming up through the pipeline every day, practically. So we have to really think about ways in which we can improve the situation. And I want to do it through two lenses. I want to look first at challenges and opportunities for the IC, the individual contributor, which is the employee, which is me and you and many of you who are looking for the job, applying for a job, navigating recruiters and hiring managers. And I want to talk a bit about that. And then the second phase, we're going to talk about what the manager and the recruiter and the hiring manager specifically can do to help rectify the situation, because they ultimately hold and wield a lot of power in this dynamic. So from the perspective of the individual contributor, when you enter this space as a early career dev, a bit later in life, there's a lot of oddities you experience. First of all, there's the privilege of having to take a pay cut. And I say it's the privilege because not everyone can do this, and it's incredibly challenging and difficult. You know that if you're coming from one professional life where you've built up a career, and you know that the software trajectory is going to yield eventually a very lucrative place for you and your family, but in that interim liminal period when you're working yourself up professionally, you're taking, for many of us, you're taking a dive down economically. And that is an incredibly challenging perspective to be in, and requires a lot of privilege, which a lot of people don't have. Then on top of that, there's also this weird situation where you are, in many cases, at the same time, simultaneously, the most experienced person, and so you're deemed overqualified for a lot of jobs because you may be applying for roles called junior developer, entry-level developer, and the people who are parsing through the CVs, they're looking and saying, well, this person's had all this professional experience. They clearly are overqualified, while at the same time, you are by definition one of the least qualified people in the room. And people who are 10, 15 years younger than you have know much more about this specific domain than you do. So you're in this interesting and odd place where you're both underqualified and overqualified at the exact same time. And it can really feel quite awkward and quite weird in many situations, being in that place where you don't really know, and you're sometimes too qualified and sometimes you're not qualified enough. So I think the first thing we need to say to help address that, and take this as an active affirmation that I'm saying it to myself and letting everyone else hear, is that your experience in your other professional life, it matters and it counts. What you did before you became a developer has intrinsic value that you can bring to the teams that you will be joining. And that your resume, your CV, despite what people tell you, despite how it can feel so often, is not a liability. Your CV with all that professional experience doesn't have to be an experience trap that keeps you from opportunities. Now, the question is what do you do about that resume? Because it can often be, for a lot of recruiters who are trying to wade their way through hundreds of CVs for a job opening, your resume can often feel like this odd thing, and they push it aside. So I think it's required of us, what we can do to help ourselves kind of stand out a bit, is to focus more on what we did in the roles that we previously held, and focus less on the titles that we held in those roles. What do I mean by that? So let me give you a couple examples. So let's say you were called previously a high school English teacher, or you were called a bartender, or you were, like me, a member of the clergy. All those titles don't sound incredibly welcoming to the role of a junior software developer or a software developer in general. But what did you do in those roles? So as a high school English teacher, perhaps you created individualized measurable project sprints for 30 students every quarter. As a bartender, maybe you manage ongoing client relationships. And as a member of the clergy, you had managed a diverse team of paid staff and volunteers, and the skill set required to motivate and to incentivize people who are not getting paid, i.e. volunteers that do work. That's an incredible skill set that you can bring to any team or any work that you're doing subsequently. So thinking more about the tasks, and these were just a couple examples, but thinking more about the tasks that were incumbent in those roles and less about the titles that you held, and focusing on those tasks in your CV can be, and highlighting them can be a real good way to lift your resume up a bit and not scare away those recruiters who say, oh, you're overqualified because you were X, Y, or Z in your previous professional life. At the same time, while you bring a lot to the table, it's also really important, and this is something that I had to learn, and I think a lot have to learn, is that, if you're coming into this role from a previous career where you built and you've gone up, quote unquote, the ladder, and you built your professional career up already, and you're entering in here, you're no longer, as we said, the most experienced or even near the most experienced. You're now one of the least experienced. And to learn to embrace that humility, learn to embrace the fact that what you know, you don't know a lot, and to internalize you don't know a lot, and to look up to the mentors who are all around you, can help you. Mentors who may be 10, 15 years younger than you, that's totally cool, totally okay. To look to them and help them guide you, and be okay and be willing, and go through the internal work that one needs to do to be a bit more humble in your work. But also remember, while you are practicing the art of humility, that humility is not a doormat. And I think a lot of people conflate humility on one hand and meekness on the other. Humility and meekness are not synonyms. You can be humble and you can also not be meek. Humble means you know what you know and you know what you don't know, and you act according within your limits. Meekness is a step beyond that. You don't have to accept abuse from people who think, it's odd that you're this older early developer. You don't have to accept insults. You can stand up for yourself, and you can also recognize that you can bring a lot to the table based on other life experiences that other people in the room or in your team might not necessarily have, while at the same time recognizing that you have quite a bit to learn from everyone else. When I try and think about how to manage this kind of challenging, difficult situation, I think of this quote from an ethicist, a 19th century ethicist, who advised his students that they should keep 2 pieces of paper in their pocket at all times. And on one piece of paper, they are to write, I am a speck of dust. And on the other, they are to write, the world was created for me. So on one hand, I am nothing. I am less than nothing. And on the other hand, I am everything. The world was created for me. I am the pinnacle. So keeping those 2 extreme polarities in tension in a dialectical conversation with each other is a great way to keep the balance going forward, and to modulate the sort of that dichotomy of humility and of knowledge, of humility and confidence at the same time. So you may not have to keep 2 literal pieces of paper in your pocket. I don't keep 2 literal pieces of paper in my pocket, but constantly being aware of that tension, that you have a lot and you also have a lot still to learn. And to learn and to accept that you don't need to undersell yourself. You have a lot of value. You have a lot of skills. You don't need to hide what you did previously. You can shout about it. You can be proud of it, and just phrase it, repackage it, reformulate it in a way that highlights the skills that are crossing over, that have applicability to working in teams, working in context of collaborative sprints, and being part of dynamic kind of workplaces. And I think it'll go a long way. The other area which can be very challenging for new developers is, especially for older developers, I would say, is what do you learn? One of the things that attracts me most to software is that it's a constant learning adventure. You never stop learning new technologies, new frameworks, new skills. But at the same time, if you're someone starting out, in your late 30s or older, you might already have, let's say, a mortgage, you might have children, might have a family, might have older parents to help take care of, and you feel this internal pressure to need to jump and accelerate because you can't afford to take too long to jump ahead in your career because you have so many responsibilities that maybe, and of course this is a generalization, other people who are younger might also have more responsibilities, but generally, as you get older, you start accumulating debts and bills and family and older parents and all those other situations. And so you feel that pressure. And in fact, in this field, that pressure feels very, very real. Do I focus as a new developer on JavaScript? What about being a Python dev? There's all this talk about Rust and Elixir. Maybe I should look at Rust. I heard Rust is really really cool. What about type dynamic languages like TypeScript? That's interesting. And then how do I call myself? Should I be a front-end developer, a back-end developer, full stack, whatever that means? It's what should I learn in this time where I'm feeling the pressure cooker to try and accelerate myself? So when I think about that question, the way that I approach it is to weigh the idea of learning applied concepts more than a deep dive into a specific language. And what I mean by that is if I would stop you on the street and I would ask you to explain this in plain English, what would you say? And I got that intellectual exercise from the time when I was in seminary and rabbinical school. And our teachers would be teaching us, let's say, archaic texts from the 2nd century in ancient Babylon in Aramaic. And we were full of technical jargon language. And he would say and interrupt us, okay, and if I was just walking with you on 5th Avenue and somebody said, explain this to me without any jargon, without any technical terminology in simple English, could you do that? So could you look at this piece of code in Ruby and explain, the basics of object-oriented programming, creating classes? What are attributes for a class? What is an instantiation of a class and the variable that holds it? Could you explain those ideas in plain English? And then if you could do it in Ruby, could you also do it in JavaScript? And could you do it in Python? And could you look at a piece of code in C# and do the same thing? So learning the basics, learning the fundamentals that come and appear over and over and over again in different programming languages. The syntax changes, the style changes, but the idea is a data structure. You can talk about an array or talk about a hash across languages. You can learn the syntax and pick that up depending on what the job specifications might be once you have some of those fundamental programming concepts and ideas more deeply rooted in your knowledge base. So I think that's really a fundamentally important thing to do. So on the topic of the IC, the individual contributor, to recap what I think are some of the fundamental areas. First of all, your resume, your CV, it's not a liability. It is an asset. It is a strength. It brings with it a lot of experience. And it's a question of packaging and focusing more on what you did and less on what you were called. And similarly, there is a constant tension between being humble, recognizing what you don't know, which is a lot, at the same time understanding that you're not a doormat and that you do bring a lot of skills to the table, and you can bring what you can bring while also recognizing what you don't know and being gracious and accepting the advice and the wisdom of people who've been in this field for longer than you and have a lot to teach you. And then as far as what it comes to mean to learn, focusing more on the concepts and applying those concepts than a deep dive into one particular language. Learning multiplicity of languages and learning the ability to navigate those languages, review the code, to write code in those languages while learning the concepts that can be applied in those languages, I think is a better bet when you have that kind of pressure cooker moment when you're an older developer, jumping into this career and you have maybe a lot of responsibilities you're trying to navigate at that same time. Now, when it comes to the manager, now that's a whole different arena. The manager, the hiring manager, the recruiters as well, they wield a lot of power in this process. And and the more power one yields, the more responsibility they have to address and to fix the system. So let's talk about the manager. So I think it all begins when you think about managerial roles. It all begins from the orientation that the manager takes in the way in which they conduct themselves as a manager. And I'm really moved by this quote from Nelson Mandela, that it's better to lead from behind and put others in front. That if a manager's general orientation to their managerial philosophy is that I will stand behind my reports, I will support them, I will lift them up, I will be there for them when they fall, and I will celebrate their victories because my victories, my success is inextricably bound up in their success. And the more they succeed, the more I succeed through them, and the more the organization succeeds writ large. And I often think that that is a great summation of what we often call servant leadership, which is to lift others up, to not see your job as a manager through your lens, but to see it through the lens of those who report to you. Now, that's not specifically about older second career developers. That could be about anyone. Could be about anyone they're managing at all. And that's just a general shift, a paradigm shift in the managerial orientation, which I think can be so fundamentally important to the way in which a manager conducts themselves, which is really, really, really integral. Okay. And the other area that I think is also equally important is, it happens to be that when a lot of people rise up, and often managers are promoted to the role as manager, and they may have been an individual contributor themselves, and that in itself it's a question of whether somebody should be promoted to managerial roles. Is that really part of the pipeline? Someone should probably select that they want to help lead and to mentor and to guide people, and it shouldn't be seen as like a path from IC to manager. But bracketing that whole problematic equation, putting it aside, when someone occupies that role, they sometimes develop a bit of an inflated ego. I don't know if anyone's ever seen it before. You might have seen it, I'm not sure. But that ego can be obstructionist, can get in the way of recognizing that the more diversity you bring to the table, the broader your team and representation of orientations and of genders and of race and ethnicity and religion and non-religion backgrounds, of age, the more experience you bring to the table, the more broad your perspective will be in crafting the projects you're working on. And the more broad and more deep your projects are, the better they will represent the customers and the users that they are seeking to enlist. And so it's actually not only just a question of ethics. It's not even just a question of, it's the ethical thing to be diverse. It's also a question of the self-interest of the profit motive of the company. Companies that want to succeed will create diverse teams. That means they need to think beyond themselves and make room in their own headspace to be able to create teams of people across genders and across races and across ethnicities and across ages. And that's fundamentally important. The other area managers can really focus on is the question of what their pipeline looks like. There is a hiring pipeline out there, and that hiring pipeline is deeply problematic. And recruiters who are sourcing candidates and hiring managers who are looking through that sourcing have a unusual and inordinate amount of power in the hiring by looking at that pipeline. There's often two paths when one imagines the pipeline for hiring. The first path kind of looks like, did you start coding when you were 8 years old? And if you started coding when you were 8 years old, then sure, we can fast forward and congratulations, you now have a job. You're amazing. Great, you got the job. The other path involves a couple more steps. Did you go to college? Oh, that's great. You went to college. Did you happen to graduate with a computer science degree? Oh, you did. That's marvelous. Do you like living and sleeping in the office? Do you like spending every moment of your life in this office? You do? That's amazing. Great. You got a job. I'm so happy. Welcome to the team. These two paths are exclusive to people who come from backgrounds that maybe they didn't go to college, or if they went to college, they didn't graduate with a CS degree, and maybe they weren't coding from the time they were 2 years old. It's incredibly exclusivist, these two paths, and yet these two paths are incredibly common in the sourcing of candidates, and who you source is who rises up to the hiring manager. So really, you have to nip it in the bud at the pipeline itself. And that pipeline is fundamentally, intrinsically, indisputably broken. And you, managers, and if you're listening to this and you're not a manager, you may one day be a manager, you may have been a manager, you may be a manager again, you can help fix it. You can fix it by thinking all the time, what doors are you opening? And always asking yourself, well, when I'm recruiting, the doors I open for recruiting are these following doors. And by opening these doors, what doors am I keeping closed? And why are those doors closed? And how can I open the most amount of doors in my pipeline? Because I can't hire people from non-traditional backgrounds if I don't know they exist. And I know they exist by opening the door for them to walk through. It's really, really important. So to recap from the perspective of the manager, it's about coming to the role with an orientation of a servant leader. It's understanding that a diverse team of people who are older second career developers across all spectrums of diversity, including older developers, is not only a good thing to do qua the ethic, it's also a good thing to do qua your profit motive. It creates a better product. It creates better work. And that your ego, your ability to see beyond yourself, can be obstructing to that process of creating a more diverse team. And the way in which you can create that more diverse team is to start at the very beginning, which is your hiring pipeline. Open as many doors as you possibly can to bring in as many people. This can seem like a lot. it's a lot of work to do. It seems like it's never ending. And I really do believe it's a lot of work to do. But I'm very moved by the idea that just because it's a lot of work to do, it doesn't mean it's not incumbent upon us to get involved and do what we can. Whether we are entering the field, whether we are a manager in the field, whether we entered already and now we have some credentials, some leverage to exert on the field, every time we make it better, make it better in the organizations we're in, make it better for ourselves, we are ipso facto also making it better for other people. And in this era, in this climate of people changing careers en masse, maybe one of the greatest movements of career switching in the modern time, it is really deeply important that we exert that effort to make it better for everyone, because we'll make our teams and we'll make our companies, we'll make the organizations we work for all the better for it. Thank you so much. I would love to stay in touch. You can find me on Twitter or you can email me, and it's been great. Thank you.